I'm Kermit Whitfield, member of the CMC Board of Trustees and Director of Communications at United Way of Central Ohio. Great to see everybody here today. Thanks for coming out. Today's forum, Cartoon Crossroads Columbus, the Arnold of cartoons, is sponsored by WCBE 90.5 FM and presented in partnership with the Wexner Center for the Arts. Won't you please help me thank them for their support and welcome WCBE's General Manager, Dan Michalko, to the stage to introduce our forum.
For events like this, I prefer the title WCBE's Alpha Geek, so I was very excited when they asked me to do the introduction. You'll find out in a minute. First, the big picture. WCBE is very proud to partner with the Columbus Metropolitan Club and, more importantly, its mission to connect people with ideas. It's a natural match because our organizations are alike in a lot of ways. For example, both CMC and WCBE are driven by our members. And both our members are a very curious lot. They share lifelong learning as a very distinct character trait. And they, you, put a stake in the ground by taking that a step further and putting a stake in the community. So we're all better off, I think, for both organizations. Okay, the PR time is over. Now it's time for the real fun. It has sadly come to pass in recent years that the mass gatherings of cartoon culture, popularly known as Comic Cons, have insidiously transitioned to center around movies and gaming, television, which is cool because icons like Batman and The Flash and the Green Arrow are getting exposed to greater audiences, but that leaves the rich history and the art, the craft, the magic, the very imagination of cartoons languishing off the stage and out of the spotlight. But as Ohio has birthed countless masters of this craft for at least 80 years, going back at least to when those two wide-eyed Ohio teenagers' imaginations gave birth to the Man of Steel in the 1930s, our state's outpouring of sage talents of pen and paper, combining illustration with the written word, means the cartoon will rise again. As a critical and creative learning tool for reading skills, as a chuckle for political satire when a laugh is sorely needed, as in these trumped-up political campaign times, as a graphic novel spellbinding high-stakes romance or a can't-put-it-down crime drama or a reinvention of the iconic Dark Knight, the cartoon will rise again. And in no small part, it's thanks to these champions and keepers of the flame who are here with us today. And thanks to you, the cartoon is rising, and it's happening right here in Columbus, Ohio. So it's time for me to play the artful dodger and dodge off stage so that you can welcome, in turn, Professor Emeritus Lucy Caswell from the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum in the center. Yes, after each one. To her right, cartoonist extraordinaire Jeff Smith. To my right, cartoonist and editor of the Comics Reporter, Tom Spurgeon. And keeping us at a far distance from each other, our moderator for today and host, director of the Wexner Center, Sherri Geldin. So, welcome to you all, and Sherri, the podium is yours. You have the con.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you all for being here, and thanks to our friends and partners at the Metropolitan Club. We're delighted to be talking about this really rising topic, as it were, in Columbus, Ohio. As Dan has noted, and I think you guys are all aware, Columbus and Ohio generally have played an extraordinary role over the years in birthing comic talent. And I can thank my chief expert at the Wexner Center for the little history lesson that he gave to me, because full disclosure here, I am by no means a comic or cartoon expert, but I have come to develop a very real appreciation and admiration for that world. But Dave Philippi, who is the Wexner Center's director of film video, has done more to carry that torch at the Wex and in partnership with the Billy Ireland, which is, of course, on OSU's campus. Some of you may know that actually Billy Ireland was a Dispatch editorial cartoonist. He was so popular, as I understand it, that he was offered a stake in the paper, and I dare say that wasn't a common thing, nor is it still for political cartoonists. He was his apprentice, actually, a young apprentice by the name of Milton Caniff, who is also well known hereabouts in Columbus, worked together, and it was actually Caniff's, as I understand it, a decision to contribute all of his papers and archive to the Ohio State Library that really initiated what is now called the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum. And you'll hear more about that from Lucy Caswell when she speaks, but she has been or was at the university since 1970 and has been an absolute critical force in establishing this extraordinary collection. But I think it's also fair to say that comics as an art form have always had something of a rocky road. The kind of fine art, high art, low art dichotomy that is so often, held close by the keepers of the canon, I think have often placed comics in that sort of relegated space that isn't quite, sort of prime time museum ready. That said, there have been a few institutions over the years, and I'm proud to say the Wexner Center is one of them, that have recognized cartoon and comic art as among equals with their other peers, painting, sculpture, photography, architecture, design, you name it. And what's really interesting is that in some ways, when you think about an artist like Roy Lichtenstein, of course an alum of Ohio State, or Andy Warhol, they sort of riffed off of comics and appropriated them, but in many ways they became way more famous than the rest of the cartoonists whose work they were kind of pilfering along the way. So there is a still interesting dichotomy there. So let me just let you know that in addition to having done what I think was a really terrific exhibition of Jeff Smith's work in 2008, which was accompanied by a terrific catalog that Dave did, there are a whole host of institutions that have increasingly turned their attention to comics, including the Columbus Museum, including CCAD, which is creating a real family here in Columbus. And in addition to having presented the work of Dan Clowes a few years ago, we've partnered often with a whole host of colleagues across campus, but particularly the Billy Ireland, to bring such artists and comics historians and theorists to town as Art Spiegelman, Françoise Mouly, Matt Groening, Scott McLeod, Terry Moore, and OSU alum Paul Pope. But I have to say that no single initiative, no single institution could possibly have done what these three on the stage have managed to create when they launched Cartoon Crossroads Columbus. Working with partners like the Billy Ireland, the Wexner Center, the Thurber House, CCAD, the Columbus Museum, and even the Columbus Metropolitan Library, they really pursued a feat of truly audacious vision and commitment and sheer willpower to craft out of whole cloth what is likely to become a real hallmark of Columbus culture. And I think we owe them a huge debt of gratitude. But I think it's also really important to say that this was an initiative that was organic, that was really conceived and propelled by the artists and the experts, and that while branding is a nice byproduct. It wasn't the reason for doing it. This was all about content. And so content being key, I want to now engage the content experts in all of this. Because with the launch this past fall of Cartoon Crossroads Columbus, you will now see it returning on an annual basis under the leadership and auspices of the people here, as well as their partners around the community. And I dare say there are folks who think this could well yet become the South by Southwest of Columbus, but we're not going to call it the Arnold of Columbus. If anything, we're going to call it the Billy of Columbus. So let's learn a little bit about how all that came about. I'm going to just read you the mission of CXC because I think it very concisely states everything that's important about this institution. It is meant to celebrate the diversity of the cartoon arts, including animation, editorial cartoons, comic strips, comic books, and graphic novels, as well as celebrating their creators. So putting the artists first and foremost. And with that, let's turn to one of the artists among us. Jeff, give us a little hint as to how this whole idea materialized and how you went from 0 to 60 in about 1 second.
Well, first, I just want to say that was an amazing introduction you had, and I really think we could just go home now. You did a really good job. My wife and I, she's my business partner, Vijaya, and she's also the 4th member of this team, but she's sitting in the back because we couldn't talk her into coming up here. But we've published our comics for 25 years, and over those 25 years, my comic Bone has been published in many languages. We've traveled all over the world. We've seen every kind of conceivable comics festival from the big media shows in San Diego, the Comic-Con that everybody sees on TV, to smaller shows near Washington, D.C. or San Francisco, where again the focus is more on the cartoonist as an author or an artist instead of just a member of a pop culture team. And we also saw things in Europe that I really enjoy, which was more of instead of being in a ballroom or in a hotel, a festival would engage the town. So the town was actually part of it. So if you go to Lucca, a little town in Tuscany, a little ancient walled city, you go into the center of the town, and yes, there are some tents around, but there are exhibits in different parts of the town. But you also stop and have some, white bean farro and some beautiful Chianti, and the town and the experience become part of the comic book show. So, and I like that. And I also grew up in Columbus with my wife, Vijaya. We went to Worthington back when there was only the one school. And we've moved away a couple times. We lived in California for a while, but we always end up here. We love this community. We have a lot of friends. And the way the town has grown, I don't have to tell you anyone here. The last 15 years has been ridiculous. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And we love it. We love this town. And I have to often explain to my New York and Paris cartoonist friends why we live in Columbus. And it's just really that good. So when Lucy approached Vijaya and I, as she was just getting ready to enter semi-retirement, she had been putting on a comic book show every 3 years, a festival of cartoon. It was sort of a cross between an academic conference and one of these shows that's just really a celebration of the art form. It was not a huge show. I mean, it was kept to it was on campus, but the cartoonists that would come, like Bill Watterson or Sergio Aragonés or Charles Schultz or Will Eisner, these are names that are like royalty in our field. They would come, and they had a wonderful time with the way Lucy treated them. The long and the short of it is this triennial festival that Lucy's library put on was beloved by the comics community. And when she was reaching semi-retirement and thinking, well, it's time for this to evolve or maybe stop. And she said, do you have an idea? And I know I'm taking up a lot of time here, but this is it. I'm getting to it. one of the things that was blowing my mind about Columbus was that the Columbus Museum of Art was the first in the nation to exhibit all of Robert Crumb, the famous underground bizarro cartoonist. His book of Genesis, he drew Genesis like a comic book, for real, straight, 300 pages long. The Columbus Museum of Art, over like 5 galleries or something, laid out all 300 pages in sequence. And I was like, what? That was almost like I was flashing back to an acid trip from the 70s. How is this possible? How is this happening? And then more things started happening. The Thurber House, working with CMA, started a graphic novelist in residency. So once a year, a young graphic novelist comes and sleeps in Thurber's bedroom. I mean, what's that like, you know? You know it's haunted. I don't know. I guess they turn off the gift shop and let them run upstairs. I don't know. Of course, we have the Billy Ireland, which is the greatest collection of original art from the earliest days of cartooning to now, of editorial cartoons, comic strips, and graphic novels. And I know because I've seen all the collections in the world. This is the best one. What am I leaving out? Something. Oh, CCAD. Oh my gosh, then CCAD got involved. And they're like bringing in powerhouses. They're bringing in Chris Ware to give a talk. Chris Ware he's New York Times best-selling cartoonist, considered one of the lights of the art form. They brought in Marjana Satrapi. Again, one of the, she did Persepolis, just an astonishing thing. The Wexner, you brought in Dan Klaus, and you did a show with me. And so my idea was, what if we could get all these amazing institutions that all do incredible cartooning events once a year, get them to do it all in the same weekend? How hard could that be?
Apparently not very.
Or just get them to all do it on the same weekend, and then make Columbus a destination point once a year in the fall.
So, Lucy, I think we should turn to you for a moment. I'm going to guess that a number of people in this room do not actually know the full extent of the treasure that is the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum. And very briefly, I thought if you could just cite some of the stats that will really impress upon people what makes this a truly unique resource in the world, not just in Ohio, not just in the United States, but in the world.
I'm not going to give numbers because I think that's not really useful. I'd like to start actually a little further back than Dan did. Cartoons in Ohio have an amazing history, and it's like there's this wonderful karma that has happened for the Billy Ireland to be in the center of the state of Ohio. The person who created what we believe to be the first American comic strip was born in Lancaster, Ohio.
The Yellow Kid.
Yellow Kid. The first American-born political cartoonist, Thomas Nast, was born in Germany. Frederick Burr Opper was born in Madison, Ohio. So you start way far back and have this incredible legacy. And as Sherri said, Milton Caniff is the founding collection for the Billy. And he really changed the history of the American comic strip because Milton told stories for grown-ups. Comic strips weren't created for kids. They were created for grown-ups because grown-ups have disposable income to buy the newspaper. And Milton's job, as he would describe it, was to sell tomorrow's paper. So he needed to tell a story that made you want to find out what happened to those characters, and you had to buy tomorrow's paper in order to do that. So he understood storytelling for adults in a really wonderful way, and he trained with Hopkins of Hopkins Hall and was an amazing artist. So you combine writing skill and drawing talent, and we are grateful that Milton lived for about 10 years after we started the library in 1977 to be our ambassador. because it's sort of like Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney putting on a show. You know, how is you're going to do what in Columbus, Ohio? And how do we know that Ohio State will keep its promises and blah, 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 blah. And when Milton would go to people and say, my university will keep its promises, they believed him. So we got the papers of Walt Kelly, Pogo. We got the papers.
And if I could just jump in and say, Milton Caniff did Terry and the Pirates and
Yes.
Steve Canyon. Just not everybody here is a
No,
cartoon
thank you,
head.
thank
so,
you.
right.
So we got those collections very early on. We got the archives of the National Cartoonist Society, of which Milton was a founder, and the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists. So those gave us the beginnings of what has developed into the critical mass of the library. The largest collection we got was in 1998, and it arrived in 6 semis. It was the San Francisco Academy of Comic Art collection, and basically Bill Blackbeard rescued all those bound volumes of newspapers that libraries were tossing when they went to microfilm, and had people clip them so that he had chronologically organized runs of pretty much every comic strip that had been published. He also had a complete run of The Yellow Kid, great big beautiful newspaper pages like this, which you can see on our website because we've digitized them. And we actually, when the library opened in 2013, we had a scholar from Germany who had traveled here in order to see the real thing, but she had used our digital version in her German university class. How cool is that?
That's pretty fantastic. Thank you. So, talking about imports, Tom, what is it that persuaded you that this was an idea whose time had come specifically here in Columbus, Ohio, and how did we get so fortunate as to recruit you here?
I was thinking when you were talking about the title of it, the Arnold of cartoons, I actually flashed on Gary Coleman rather than whatever the article. So I'm very new to town. I'm 8 months in. I really have enjoyed it here, and really it is a great place to live, and that's a big part of it, that this is a great place to live. And I think our secret goal to make this the international capital of cartooning in period, the universe, whatever, and get all the cartoonists, or as many as we can, to move here and become productive arts community members and enjoy all of the great things about Columbus, including all of these staggering institutions that want to be involved with comics as an art form and as an honorable industry and an honorable way to make a living is astounding. I mean, it's almost, how did you get me here? You couldn't have kept me away from the offer, that was made, because comics is a really honorable profession. It's a really self-hating profession in a lot of ways. It was made a juvenile profession. It was pilloried in Congress in the 1950s. It's treated as kids' stuff still to this day, even though having worked 20 years, it's a lot easier to explain what I do now than it was 20 years ago, which to just get blank stares from people. But I think that, a show like this and an institution or a yearly kind of festival like this can be a remarkable thing for an industry that doesn't always get nice things, and cartoonists that aren't always appreciated for all they give to the culture. And establishing a relationship, especially one of our outreach goals is to reach young cartoonists, and establishing a relationship with young cartoonists today gives you a tie-in to all of the producers of television shows and writers of movies and writers of TV shows of tomorrow, because that's where they're coming from now. They're coming from comics the same way they came from stand-up comedy maybe 20 years from now, or 20 years ago. But that's where they come from now. So I think that there is so much good to be done for comics and so much good that they can do in Columbus to kind of bring you that affectionate tie to this town. If it's not their hometown literally like it's become mine, it can become their second hometown or their second place to live. And we have all the nice stuff here. So if we can manage to pull the show off in the way that we have set out to do, set out to do and cover all the aspects of the art form and really focus on the great artists and the great makers of those books and comic strips and editorial cartoons, then I think this could be a truly astounding thing. So that's why I'm here. Also, Jeff asked, and he's a nice guy, so I was happy to come over.
Hard guy to turn down, actually. So what can you all tell us about plans for the next one, which must be well underway at this point with such...
Well underway. We can just relax.
I bet you can. But with, I think what everyone would agree was a pretty spectacular launch and perhaps a surprisingly robust launch when it was meant to be something of a trial run.
Yeah.
So how are you going to turn what is meant to be the real debut into something that actually tops what has already been a remarkable success?
The first CXC was held the first weekend of October, this past couple months ago. And our plan, we originally called it a beta launch because we thought, well, let's have a small 2-day show and test it out, because the idea is novel. The idea of, instead of having it in one place in a convention center, having it take place in multiple venues around town, we didn't know how hard that would be to get across to people. Would people understand it or not, maybe not like it? So we did a test run, and we somehow ended up with like our A-list guests that we could possibly want, like Art Spiegelman, who did Mouse and won a Pulitzer, and his wife, Francoise Mouly, the art director of New Yorker and publisher of her own line of comics, and Beck, who did My Friend Dahmer. I can't list everybody, we'll be here all day. But it ended up being a powerhouse of a show with cartoonists that it was kind of amazing to me that we had this kind of firepower. And at the same time, with our little venues around town on a rainy weekend, every single event was standing room only. Some they were all full, or there were people like who couldn't get in the room. So next year it's going to be bigger. We'll have more days. It'll be 4 days, the 13th to the 16th.
Of October.
This year, the Metropolitan Library was under construction and closed, and so was the Columbus Museum of Art. Both those institutions, the Art Museum, is open, and the library will be. We're going to have our Saturday, Sunday show at the new Metropolitan Library. The space, I've seen drawings and blueprints, and it's going to be really perfect. We're going to look right out over the Topiary Garden. CMA, the Art Museum, will be open and will be participating. They're going to work with the Thurber House, have the graphic novel in residency be out in town that weekend. They'll have a show, an exhibit up there. CCAD will bring someone in and have a night dedicated to their guest. And so will the Wexner, and so will the Billy.
Yes, well, there will be an academic conference to begin the weekend, and then we'll have a day of programming at the Billy, workshops for cartoonists, among other things. There will be an animation night at the Wexner Center, and then the tabling will be Saturday and Sunday, as Jeff said, and it is...
Dan will probably have a Bugs Bunny Film Festival for you.
It is a... curated tabling event, which means that Tom is pretty particular about who is invited to bring their wares. And we had people this year travel from Houston and Chicago and...
Yeah, we did. We had people travel from all over the country just to buy at the show because of the exhibitors that we were able to assemble at the Cultural Arts Center, which was very small. I think we got in like 40 exhibitors there, and should have about anywhere between 80 and 100, depending on the quality of the exhibitors. And so I guess, all that means is that we have kind of a split event, is that we're kind of around campus and up on campus those first 2 days with an academic conference and professional development classes and cartoons and and the whole historical weight of the Billy Ireland. And then we kind of moved down, and the Wexner. And then we moved downtown to kind of the library, the Art Museum, the Thurber House, and CCAD area. And so our Saturday and Sunday are spent down there.
And the Short North Business Alliance is one of our council members, and we're hoping to do some really fun programming related to cartoon art in the Short North as a part of our weekend. And
Right.
so this is just another example of how much fun we're having with our partners in the community.
I think it's a really important point. I alluded to it earlier, but the fact that this kind of network has developed really through the initiative and the passion of the content people, I think it really makes it unique among all the initiatives I can think of in the city. And I think it bodes really well for young people who are increasingly thinking about Columbus as a creative place in which to live and work beyond their college years. It kind of gives it a very hip vibe. All those cartoonists running around on campus and downtown, they kind of have a look about them, I'd say. Pretty,
they're starting
pretty
to take over like
unmistakable.
cafes and things.
Yeah, so we certainly at the Wexner Center and at the Billy Ireland and across Columbus loved the idea that this kind of natural partnership has evolved. Way apart from, anything that somebody from on high said, oh, let's create something that is uniquely branded to Columbus, Ohio. That's not how this came about, and I think that's what's so special. So in a few minutes, we're going to move to some audience questions, but let me pose just a final sort of thought query, not to sort of end on a gloomy note, but I think we're all aware that it was probably 10 years ago that a Dutch newspaper set off something of a firestorm by publishing cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. I had forgotten until kind of looking back on that story that Charlie Hebdo actually followed that by publishing some of those same cartoons. And of course, we are all aware of the tragedy that befell Charlie Hebdo earlier this year. So I'm wondering, for those of you who are steeped in the world of comics and cartoons, which of course includes political satire and parody and kind of pastiche, does it suddenly feel like more of a sort of moral obligation and force to be doing the work that you do?
I can speak to this. Well, I mean, I primarily came at the Danish cartoons as a journalist, and I do know that was a major factor as a journalist rather than as an author, that you simply publish the cartoons. That was actually a big deal in 2005 and 2006, where nearly every major outlet, print and online, refused to publish the cartoons. We published the cartoons, and it was rocky for a while, the kind of emails we were getting for that. So yeah, I mean, I think that, the whole thing comes down to, in my mind, to kind of, it made me think that we should all just kind of do our jobs and respect people to do our jobs. And the Charlie Hebdo guys were satirists, and satirists has a magnificently important role in societies, in our societies, in Western societies. And I think that when you can expect satire from them. I think when you're a journalist and you have a mission to inform people what a cartoon looks like, even that people are killing themselves over, then you have a mission to publish that cartoon. That's your job. And some of the other stuff, some of the provocative elements, some of the ugliness of the signs or ugliness of the political wishes expressed, I don't know whose job that is. That's nobody's job, And so the extra stuff of it, I deplore, while at the same time absolutely valuing, the free expression and the satirical element. And so if we could leave satire to the satirists and journalism to the journalists, I think we'd all be a lot better off when processing issues like that.
The other important thing to know is that the Supreme Court unanimously declared in the case Falwell versus Flint that cartoon art is protected speech. And so we have a lot to be grateful for that.
I'm a member of the board of the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. It's a First Amendment group, and we're often involved in free speech cases. Obviously, in France, we don't play a role or anything. I don't have a desire to draw the Prophet Muhammad, so I probably won't. But if I wanted to, I would really be pissed if somebody wanted to shoot me about it. I mean, I think that's completely the wrong idea. Why don't you draw a picture of me or something? You know, why guns? Don't shoot people because you don't like what they're doing. It's just wrong.
Yeah, the great Syrian cartoonist Ali Farzad, whose hands were broken by government thugs after he drew cartoons opposing some of the politics going on in his home country, said, he always says absolutely that the only way to fight a cartoon is with another cartoon. The only way to fight speech is with another form of speech. And it seems like he's earned the wisdom to kind of say that.
It also points out that the cartoons are powerful. They do get their message across really quick, and they're usually done by somebody who's got a little bit of a smart-ass attitude, and it pisses people off. And there's a long history of that. Tammany Hall with
Nast, yeah.
Thomas Nast, yeah.
Well, I don't think there are any smartasses up here, but far be it from me to say so. We do, though, have some incredible, passionate, committed creatives in this community, and I would ask that you give them all a round of applause for what they've accomplished. So it is CMC's tradition to take audience questions, as I think you all know. Please, when you approach the mic, state your name, ask your question, and we will thank you in advance to not make any long editorial comments, although we encourage you to draw a cartoon and submit it. So let's proceed with the first question.
Great, thank you. Tim Sword with the Greater Columbus Sister Cities International. We have 10 international sister cities, and I traveled a number of them this year, and one of the gifts that I gave was local graphic novelist Rafael Rosado's, drawing a blank here. Beware of the giants, beware of dragons.
Dragons beware.
And it was funny because the reason I took it to Brazil was because they did publish it in Portuguese, but they wanted it in English because their kids, they want to learn English, and they found this is a good venue to do that. So I thought that was interesting. My real question, though, is what are you doing to promote internationally your event, and how can we help?
Well, we could talk for sure. I bet you could help. As we're starting out, we're a little small, and we don't quite have the budget to bring people over, but all of us know many cartoonists all over the world, and we have our wish list that we want to start bringing over. As far as promoting it, I'm not sure what that would take.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. You know, the cartooning community, the international cartooning community is reasonably tight, and there's a high level of awareness of what we're doing here. I know when several folks that went to the Angoulême Festival, which is the big festival for French language comics, that a lot of what they were hearing back when the Columbus connection was made clear was, wow, you guys from there, CXC, there's Billy, there's an awareness of what's going on here, and an awareness that what's going on here might be something good. The only thing I can think of officially is we were kind of off the record contacted about eventually building an international series, like an organization of festivals that kind of take the art form and the industry seriously in the way that we're taking it seriously, as opposed to the fun stuff like zombie walks that other kinds of shows do. But there may be an international organization, but as far as media outreach or anything of that, that was not on our docket for the first show.
Yeah, it's down the pike.
Yeah.
So that is down the pike, and we will have an international guest, if not this time, then next time, because that's going to be one of our recurring things, for sure.
And we can start with a list of who all our sister cities are. Because I was just in Brazil, and I saw in the airport who the sister city was, and that wasn't where I was going.
Yeah, well, I'd love to work with you on that. That'd
I
be
would
amazing.
definitely like to see.
Yes.
I'm Ken Thompson. I'm an architect, and being so I'm particularly attuned to drawings, and Charles Schulz is one of my favorites of how he could draw Snoopy, which is a few lines and capture so many different expressions so beautifully. Anyway, I've got 3 quick questions. What would you say is your favorite cartoon strip, or maybe that influenced you the most more than anything to getting into cartoons? Secondly, did you ever dream of having a cartoon published in the New Yorker? And then finally, do you think Calvin and Hobbes will ever be picked up and republished someplace? Maybe it is, a syndicate somewhere, but...
Calvin and Hobbes is still in print in the book form. I mean, and they're still really good sellers. They're not going to go away anytime soon. I have been invited to submit cartoons to the New Yorker many times. I know a lot of people that work there. I just have no interest. I'm not a one drawing kind of cartoonist. I tell big, sprawling yarns. And what was the first question? Oh, Charles Schulz. Snoopy.
No, your favorite.
That was my favorite. I learned to read because I was reading Charlie Brown. My dad would read it to me every Sunday. I loved it. And then I got like a little book. It was like a 25-cent paperback of, You're in Trouble, Charlie Brown, or something. I can't remember. But I remember my dad wasn't around to read it. And I remember the moment where I was like, well, I've got to figure this out right now. And I did. And it was awesome. So thank you, comics.
Carol?
I want to hear the others' favorites first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm a 1970s kid, so Peanuts was really dominant, and Schulz was everywhere at the time. But my favorite all time is a strip by a man named Crockett Johnson called Barnaby, which is about a little kid who sees a fairy or has a relationship with a fairy godfather, kind of a coat-wearing, cigar-smoking kind of oddball that isn't really good at magic, and it's very, very funny and very, very sweet, and very much tied into how I connected with my father, because I found out after my father had passed away that he had clipped those with the help of relatives sending him newspapers from all over the country. So that would be my all-time favorite for sure.
And I won't answer the question because we do development with lots of cartoonists.
I'm Carol Looper. I'm a retired journalist. I know that satirists and political cartoonists obviously have a field day and have a lot to choose from in terms of their ideas and their choices. How do you come up with the ideas and the storylines that you want to do? I so admire creativity. I don't have it. Where do these things come from?
Generally, when I start a project, it's usually something that's a pet interest of mine. Bone comes out of my love of Warner Brothers cartoons, that kind of zany, traditional, classic American, big-nosed, three-fingered, Bigfoot cartoon character, and epic stories. In high school, I really got into the Iliad and the Odyssey and Le Morte d'Arthur, the Lord of the Rings. I love big, giant, 1,100-page epics. So I wanted to mix, Bugs Bunny with, the Lord of the Rings or the Iliad, and that was enough to keep me interested for the 12 years it took me to write a 1,300-page comic book. And the same with any of my other projects. I did a science fiction project because I'm really interested in physics and Tesla. And my current project is called Tukey Save the Humans, and it takes place 2 million years ago when there were multiple hominids living. We weren't the only human species. There was a bunch of them. But only one, our direct ancestor, Homo erectus, survived and made it out of Africa. So I'm telling, and I figured it had to be somebody, right? So I'm doing that story of that guy that made it out.
Very cool. Thank you for being here. I'm Jane Scott. I actually have a couple of questions, but it can't be easy to get syndicated. I mean, there's got to be a lot of inspiring artists out there.
He's been
Can
syndicated.
you can you tell us a little bit about the process of syndication?
I worked with a dear friend of mine from my hometown. I'm from over in Indiana, named Dan Wright, who did a strip called, it had two names, Wildwood and Bobo's Progress, for Jay Kennedy at King Features for about 3 years. And we actually did well enough that Jay, until he passed away, would constantly make fun of me for the strip, like us abandoning the strip. So we went in a different creative direction in our lives, but the strip was fun and reasonably successful, and I think for the limited time it ran. The process to get in was really, really difficult. And at that time, it's reduced in size about, I think it's a fifth of what it used to be, but it was literally thousands and thousands and thousands of submissions every year that they got. And they were, the thing that they always, I guess maybe we're in the post-Dilbert era, was that what really it came down to was the writing. And if you could, the standard package was 36 strips long, so 6 weeks of Mondays through Saturdays. And if you could do something, if you could do that, if you could make it so that every strip was funny on its own, you didn't have to refer to anything else, if you could make it so that it explained the central concept, then you were in that upper percentile, and then they would try to decide if there was a market, and there's all those factors. But yeah, that was crazy. Like, the syndication process was crazy, to the point at which when you got the strip, they took you to New York, and they said when the frequent reaction from cartoonists when they finally realized, like, they're in a room with all these grumpy salesmen, old-fashioned newspaper salesmen, that they would actually have weeping cartoonists because of the percentage chance that you would do that was pretty crazy. But we were a blind submission and just kind of developed from there. And it was 3 years from the original send to the syndication process. That was a lot of fun. I wish we had kept that job, actually. No offense to this job. No offense to this current job. But.
And I guess that leads me to my second question. Do you see your show, your convention, doing any kind of matchmaking for aspiring artists that would introduce them to potential? I mean, is it going to be like a talent search opportunity for some folks?
America's Got Comics.
Yeah. I mean, you might be onto something there.
Yes, in a way. In fact, one of the most important things to us is developing tools for new cartoonists to understand the lay of the land, because the newspapers are not the final holy grail that they once were. There just aren't that many papers left. There's a lot fewer slots, and there are other places to go. There's the internet, there's the graphic novel, there are other choices, but they're different skills. They take different skills business-wise and artistically, creatively.
And they're down here informally anyway. Like there were syndicate people on hand at this first show, and there was the head of Amazon's digital comics program, or one of their vice presidents was here to recruit cartoonists to kind of publish through their self-publishing program. So if you have the quality artists in a place where they'll want to come, and they seem to want to come here, then you'll get that kind of business deal, and scouting and all of that happens informally all the time at shows like this.
One of the things that we will be doing is recognizing an emerging cartoonist each year. Jeff did that this year, and in addition to the little prize that goes with it, there's a cash award. And we feel that for somebody who's just getting started, a modest amount of money, $5,000 to $7,000, can make a big difference. And so we really want to be able to give that kind of financial assistance to some, young budding talent.
Yeah, no strings attached. Just how we want you to keep making comics. So go pay off your loans or whatever. Yeah, your student loan. Well, we didn't give them that much money.
Well, I'm afraid we've come to the end of the program, although I suspect we could have gone on much longer. Thank you all again for being here. Thanks to the Metropolitan Club, and thanks again to our terrific panel.
Thank you, Sherri.
Thanks, everyone, for coming. You can view and share today's forum and all of our forums on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Let's thank our sponsors, WCBE 90.5, and our partner, the Wexner Center for the Arts. And our speakers, Lucy Caswell, Jeff Smith, Tom Spurgeon, and Sherri Geldin. And thank you all for being here. Cookies and coffee out in the lobby. Thank you.